Let's get straight to it. Black and Gold Nation. The energy in Pittsburgh is electric. The kind of moment where an entire season can swing on a single storyline. And that storyline begins with the uncertainty surrounding TJ Watt. The moment Mike Tomlin stepped up to the podium and confirmed that Watt had been taken to the hospital after feeling discomfort at the facility, everything changed. Tomlin made it clear he wasn't giving a medical diagnosis, but what he did share was enough to set off every alarm: a potential lung issue, an overnight stay for observation, additional tests scheduled, and no real clarity on when, or even how, this all started. The only clue? What was in the cafeteria when staff noticed something was wrong, and the team has handled the situation with extreme caution ever since. And before we dive in, make sure to hit that like button. It helps our channel grow inside the Black and Gold Nation. For a fan base that knows all too well how different this team looks without its defensive engine, the tension is real. The Steelers are 1-11 since 2022 in games Watt either missed or played through significant injury. That lone win came against Tom Brady in Tampa Bay. And now, with the AFC North race tighter than ever, the question isn't abstract, it's urgent. If Watt misses the remainder of the regular season, Pittsburgh's margin for error evaporates almost instantly. But this time, there is a sense that the roster is better constructed to withstand at least some turbulence. Alex Highsmith and Nick Herbig aren't Watt, but they're productive and reliable, capable of stabilizing the edge instead of leaving a crater where Watt normally dominates. It won't be the same, but it may be enough to survive. Meanwhile, the injury report delivered more layers to the story. 4 players did not practice: Derrick, Harmon, James Pierre, Andrew Pete, and Ben Skoranek. The big headline in that group is Harmon, who has already missed 2 weeks with a knee issue. Yet optimism surfaced when he shared that he expects to suit up Monday night, emphasizing that although he hurt the same knee that sidelined him early in the season, this isn't the same injury. That alone matters enormously with the Miami Dolphins coming to town, because stopping Miami's run game under the primetime lights requires physical interior play, and Harmon's presence would be a massive boost. There was better news in other areas. Darnell Washington and Malik Harrison were both limited participants while in concussion protocol, but the fact they were on the field at all this early in the week is a strong sign they could be available. And if there's one thing we know, a freezing, hard-hitting Steelers game is exactly the kind of environment where Washington's size becomes a punishing advantage. Miami defenders will not enjoy trying to tackle him in space, and Harrison's thumping style could give the Steelers exactly what they need to take the Dolphins' rushing attack out of rhythm. Full participation came from DK Metcalf, who was hospitalized briefly after the Ravens game but is now fully back, along with Kyle Duggar, Patrick Queen, and Keanu Benton. That group being healthy heading into Monday night brings a sense of stability, especially with Duggar returning from the hand injury that kept him out against Baltimore. Benton playing through an ankle injury and still practicing fully also reinforces just how tough and valuable he is to the trenches. But as all of this unfolds, another storyline is quietly growing louder around the league: the possibility that Joe Burrow could eventually force his way out of Cincinnati. His comments this week about questioning whether football is still fun for him stirred speculation about a potential trade request or even early retirement. The comparison to Andrew Luck circulated quickly, given the years of punishment Burrow has absorbed behind one of the NFL's most consistently shaky offensive lines. Although retirement feels extreme, a trade request seems far more realistic, and it sparked conversations across the league. Dan Orlovsky even suggested that the Steelers should be one of the teams aggressively pursuing Burrow if he becomes available. Of course, the idea of Cincinnati trading a 29-year-old franchise quarterback to Pittsburgh is almost laughably far-fetched. Division rivals simply don't hand over elite quarterbacks, especially not ones who sit in the same class as Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, and Josh Allen. Even Orlovsky admitted the scenario is unlikely, but the ripple effect of Burrow leaving, where he goes and what that means for other teams, opens a much more realistic avenue for Pittsburgh: Matthew Stafford. The Los Angeles Rams have been quietly positioning themselves for a long-term quarterback transition. Stafford is playing at an MVP level at 37 years old, but his age and back issues make the future murky. If Burrow actually were to land in Los Angeles, Stafford instantly becomes available, and that is where Pittsburgh suddenly enters the conversation in a meaningful way. The Steelers are in win-now mode, not because the entire roster is aging, but because Cam Hayward is nearing the end of a Hall of Fame caliber career. He's already said this is his final contract. If the team truly believes it has one more window to make a legitimate run with Hayward still anchoring the locker room, then adding a veteran like Stafford one of the most talented passers of his generation, could become a real consideration. He's a Super Bowl champion. He's playing elite football, and he would immediately elevate Pittsburgh's offense to a level it simply hasn't approached since the late prime years of Ben Roethlisberger. But the cost wouldn't be light. It could easily take a first-round pick, maybe more. Competing teams like Minnesota or Las Vegas, each with their own quarterback issues and their own urgency, would absolutely be in the hunt. The question for Pittsburgh becomes philosophical. Is it worth sacrificing part of the future for a single, all-in Super Bowl swing in 2026? And that brings us right back to the moment we're in now, uncertainty around what? A volatile AFC North, a team that has been grinding for every inch this season, and a future that may hinge on whether the Steelers decide to push all their chips to the center of the table. So before we continue into the second part of this story, what do you think about the idea of Pittsburgh going all in on a short-term window with a veteran quarterback if the opportunity presents itself? Picking up right where we left off, the question of whether the Steelers should go all in on a short-term window becomes even more complicated when you consider how the franchise has operated historically. Pittsburgh has always valued stability, draft capital, and long-term team building over splash moves for aging stars. But the dynamics surrounding this roster, this coaching staff, and this moment in the franchise's timeline are different from anything the Steelers have faced in more than a decade. The presence of Cam Hayward entering what could be his final NFL season creates an urgency that doesn't align with the natural pace of rebuilding a quarterback room. The Steelers know that once Hayward hangs up his cleats, they lose not just a future Hall of Famer, but a cultural anchor who has defined the identity of this team for years. That urgency is exactly what makes a veteran quarterback like Matthew Stafford such an intriguing possibility. If Los Angeles truly goes after Joe Burrow, as unlikely as it may seem on the surface, the ripple effect could push Stafford onto the trade market. And when you evaluate the realistic options for 2026, it's hard to ignore how dramatically he stands out. He's playing at a borderline MVP level. His arm talent, processing, and poise under pressure remain elite. Very few quarterbacks can take over a game the way Stafford still can, and even fewer could be available in a scenario that aligns with Pittsburgh's timeline. But the conversation isn't just about ability. It's about cost, risk, and opportunity. Giving up a first-round pick for a 37-year-old quarterback with a history of back issues is the kind of decision that can reshape a franchise for years, for better or worse. And while some fans argue that the team should avoid mortgaging draft picks for short-term gains, others believe the Steelers owe it to Hayward and this roster to take the swing while the window exists, even if the odds are thin. After all, how often do you have a defense with this level of potential, a coaching staff that has survived and adapted through turbulent seasons, and a narrow chance to add a quarterback capable of elevating the team overnight? What complicates matters further is that competitors for Stafford would be aggressive. Minnesota, frustrated by the J.J. McCarthy struggles and holding a core built to win now. Las Vegas, who pursued Stafford before and would likely do it again. Even Seattle or teams nearing the end of their own quarterback cycles would be willing to pay a premium. Pittsburgh wouldn't be negotiating from a place of comfort. They would be negotiating in a race. But sometimes the reality of a franchise's direction forces difficult decisions. The Steelers front office understands exactly what it takes to win in this league. They've lived through seasons defined by elite quarterback play and seasons defined by the absence of it. They know what it looks like to be one piece away. And if next year becomes the true last dance for Cam Hayward, the franchise may feel compelled to push the chips forward rather than sit back and hope things develop naturally. All of this becomes even more meaningful when paired with the current state of the roster. If TJ Watt's injury situation grows more serious, if the team has to grind through the remainder of the regular season without their defensive superstar, and if the offense continues to struggle with consistency, the hunger for a reliable quarterback becomes even more intense. It's not just about explosive playmaking, it's about leadership, command, and experience in high-pressure situations. Stafford provides that in ways few available players can. The real tension comes from this. The Steelers aren't a rebuilding team. They aren't in chaos. They aren't directionless. They are competitive, talented, and tough. But they are missing one defining piece that could propel them from in the mix to legitimate threat. That's why the idea, however hypothetical, holds so much weight. It fits the team's timeline, the locker room's needs, and the trajectory of a franchise hungry to reclaim its status in the postseason. And yes, it's a gamble, a big one. Maybe the kind that Steelers teams of the past wouldn't make. But this isn't the Steelers of the past. Circumstances have changed. Stakes have changed. Expectations have changed. And with one more great season from Hayward, a healthy roster, and the right quarterback under center, the team would enter 2026 with a real, tangible shot at making something special happen. So now I want to hear from you. Should the Steelers push their chips in and make a bold move for a veteran star if the opportunity emerges, even if it costs a first-round pick? And would Matthew Stafford be the right quarterback for that all-in moment? Let me know your thoughts. And if you want more breakdowns just like this, make sure you're subscribed, hit the like button, and check out the other videos on screen. Continuing from exactly where we left off, the heart of this conversation shifts toward what the Steelers are actually building right now, and how the pieces on this roster fit into any future that involves a major quarterback move. Because beyond Stafford, beyond Burrow, beyond any hypothetical trade, the core question is whether this team is truly one dominant offensive leader away from making a championship run. When you look at the roster the way a front office does, you start to see why this discussion carries so much weight. The defense, even with injuries, remains the soul of this team. You have TJ Watt, whose status is still uncertain but whose impact is never in question, commanding the edge when healthy. You have Alex Highsmith, a player who has evolved far beyond being a complementary piece and now stands on his own as one of the most disruptive outside linebackers in the league. Nick Herbig continues to grow into a force of his own, showing that the Steelers have true depth at a position that normally collapses if the star goes down. Add in Patrick Queen, playing through hip issues but returning to full participation, and Kyle Duggar coming back from injury, and suddenly you have a defense that looks like it can rise to the moment when everything is on the line. Then there's Keanu Benton, who continues to anchor the interior with the kind of strength and toughness Pittsburgh fans live for. His return as a full participant after that ankle scare is one of those quiet details that matters far more than people realize. It's the difference between surviving in the trenches and dictating the terms of battle. And as all of this unfolds, the team is waiting to see whether Derrick Harmon can return on Monday night, because his presence in the middle could completely alter how the Steelers defend Miami's run-heavy, motion-based offense in freezing Pittsburgh conditions. But for all the defensive grit, the truth is that the stakes surrounding the quarterback position feel heavier than they have in years. Not because the Steelers are lost, but because they're close. Close in a way that magnifies every decision. And when you zoom out and place this moment in the context of the AFC landscape, it becomes even more clear why front offices around the league could be circling seismic moves. Joe Burrow's uncertain future in Cincinnati has the potential to reshape the entire conference. If the Bengals fail to repair their relationship with him, or if Burrow himself simply reaches the point where the grind outweighs the reward, his departure would be one of the biggest quarterback shifts the NFL has seen since Peyton Manning left Indianapolis. And that's where things get interesting for Pittsburgh, not because the Steelers would ever realistically land Burrow, but because the ripple effect of his exit could drop a quarterback like Matthew Stafford onto the market. Suddenly, the Steelers face a decision between staying the course with the developmental plan at quarterback or seizing the opportunity to add a proven championship caliber passer for a 1 or 2 year run. This is where the philosophy of the franchise gets tested. For years, the Steelers have built methodically, valuing continuity and draft capital. They've avoided massive panic swings or reckless trades. And that's part of why Pittsburgh remains one of the league's most stable organizations. But stability can sometimes work against urgency, and urgency is exactly what the presence of Cam Hayward creates. Teams rarely get a player who embodies their history, culture, and identity the way Hayward does. They rarely get a decade-long defensive leader who commands the locker room the way he does. And once he leaves, the entire personality of the franchise shifts. So, when fans ask whether it's worth giving up a premium draft pick for a 37-year-old quarterback, the real question becomes, how much is one final shot with a legendary core leader worth to you? Because Stafford isn't a bridge quarterback. He isn't a placeholder. He's a proven winner, a master of late-game situations, a quarterback capable of carrying a team with a strong defense deep into January. And if the Rams do end up with a new franchise quarterback, Stafford becomes the exact type of player a win-now team would target. Think about what it would mean for the Steelers to walk into next season with a fully healthy TJ Watt, a resurgent defense, Cam Hayward in his final year, and a quarterback like Stafford guiding the offense. That's not a rebuilding team. That's a contender. A real one. One that forces every AFC team, not just division rivals, to reevaluate their path to the playoffs. But thinking through opportunity is one thing. Committing draft capital is another. The Steelers must weigh the value of holding onto a first-round pick versus the value of maximizing the last championship window of the Hayward era. Do you use that pick on a young player who may or may not develop into a star? Or do you turn that pick into a quarterback who has already shown he can win at the highest level? This is the kind of decision that splits fan bases. The kind that defines off-seasons. The kind that could either set a team up for a Super Bowl push, or leave it questioning what could have been if it stayed patient. So now, as we wrap this continuation, I'll put the question back in your hands, and I want to hear your voice on this. If Matthew Stafford truly becomes available and the price is a first-round pick, would you make that move for one final, all-in run with Cam Hayward and this defense? Let me know in the comments, and if you're enjoying these deep dive breakdowns, hit subscribe, drop a like, and check out the videos on screen to keep the conversation going. Picking up exactly where we left off, the entire conversation turns toward what this move would signal for the identity of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Because any trade for a veteran quarterback, especially one as accomplished as Matthew Stafford, would be more than a roster adjustment. It would be a statement about who the Steelers believe they are and what they believe they're capable of achieving in the immediate future. For years, the team has been hovering in that difficult middle ground, competitive enough to stay relevant, resilient enough to avoid collapse, but inconsistent enough to fall short of the true contenders. A move like this wouldn't just nudge the team forward, it would shove them into an entirely different tier. But before any dream scenario plays out, the Steelers must survive the reality of the present, and that starts with the health of their roster. The ongoing uncertainty with TJ Watt looms over everything. Even if the team believes it can operate without him for short stretches, there's no denying the weight he carries when he's on the field. The defense changes. The offensive game plan of the opponent changes. The entire emotional energy of the roster changes. There's a reason the team's record with and without him is so stark. So while optimism exists about the supporting cast, the truth is simple. The Steelers are always at their best when number 90 is causing chaos. And that's why the surrounding injuries matter so much. Derrick Harmon pushing to return this week, Darnell Washington and Malik Harrison trending upward in concussion protocol, Duggar, Queen, Benton all at full participation. These are the details that decide whether a team stays afloat when its biggest name isn't available. Miami brings a complex offense built on speed and timing, but Pittsburgh has always been the team that thrives on physicality and disruption. Even without Watt, the structure is there. The baseline is there. The question is whether they can turn that structure into production when it matters most. Which brings us back to the larger picture decisions that could shape the next era of Steelers football. Because if the team makes it through this stretch, if it holds its ground and reaches the offseason with a realistic path to growth, the front office will be forced to consider options that normally wouldn't even enter the conversation. And the Stafford scenario is compelling not just because he's talented, but because it threads the needle between two conflicting timelines. One timeline belongs to Cam Hayward, a veteran staring down the final chapter of his career. The other belongs to the young core, guys like Benton, Herbig, Washington, who are still ascending. A player like Stafford bridges those timelines in a way few quarterbacks can. He gives the team a legitimate shot to maximize Hayward's final season while also giving the young core a steady, intelligent leader capable of elevating the offense instantly. You aren't asking him to be a 10-year solution. You're asking him to be a 2-year catalyst, a spark, a veteran with championship DNA stepping into a team built on physical defense and young playmakers. And while the cost would be steep, a first-round pick in a league where draft capital is gold, it's the type of move franchises make when they sense that their window is narrow but real. And make no mistake, if Watt returns healthy, if the defense holds together, and if the offensive structure gains stability, the Steelers' window isn't theoretical. It's tangible. That's why conversations like this matter. Not because they're guaranteed to happen, but because every now and then, circumstances align in ways that force a franchise to consider the uncomfortable, to weigh loyalty against opportunity, to choose between patience and ambition. And Steeler Nation has always understood both sides of that tension. You know what it means to build a dynasty through discipline and stability, but you also know what it looks like when a team senses that a champion